Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers. John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is Wednesday, July 2nd, 2025. Out of the matrix into prime reality. That's the mantra here. And I see that my wife just threw me under the bus. We started 5, 6 minutes late, a little late today. Sorry about that. And she said it was my fault because I was slow. Okay. I'll take it. Thank you for joining us on X Rumble and YouTube in the live chat. Our wonderful moderator, Ronnie, is in. Thank you so much, Ronnie, for doing the wonderful work that you do. And of course, Christine, who threw me under the bus, my wonderful wife, as inspired in the live chat, and everyone else. Thank you for showing up for what Christine and I have deemed likely the most important subject that we could possibly talk about. I'm going to pose a question here. Is the entire world living with PTSD? And the short answer is yes. Almost the entire world, probably some notable exceptions, but more than not, the entire world is living with post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, that is the clinical diagnosis, which doesn't matter one bit what it's called. The reality is, as a researcher, you could even call it a journalist, if you will, and that's part of it. But as a researcher, I study the field every single day. We look at what is going on in the world. We observe the people around us. We observe world events. We observe the social media sphere. We observe the media sphere. And what we're seeing is a society that is very, very close to systemic collapse. And in some instances, it's happening. In some instances, you already have war and horrific war zones, which is systemic collapse. In other instances, you have societies that are where poverty and homelessness and joblessness has gone up so high that it is systemic collapse. You have sickness and disease and illness, like our nation, systemic collapse. So we have that. What we don't have is an agreed upon root cause. The agreed upon root cause or not agreed upon root cause is trauma. This is something that society at large does not acknowledge, does not know. And all the solutions that people are talking about, even in government, which, frankly, from my perspective, is the place where we should look least for solutions always. But even there, it is not properly understood. I'm actually surprised if I look at the current health sector in government, where leadership, the current leader, secretary, has openly stated his journey with trauma in his life, and has publicly talked about it often, but it hasn't yet made the headlines and in his output, which I wish it would. I wish this would be talked about everywhere. I want to today go over what trauma actually is, how it manifests, how it affects the person that's traumatized, how it affects their behaviors, how it affects the generations to come, entire societies, and of course, what we can do about it. Now, let me say this. It is our intention, and has been for 20 years, to help spark a healing revolution, realizing that there is a way out of what we're in. And there is a hopelessness in the messaging of many people that say, we'll never get out of this. This is just the way things are. Let me preface this by saying this is what trauma does. It leads people into helplessness and hopelessness. Trauma is the fundamental root cause of the Wetiko mind virus that so many suffer from, because it affects a healthy mind to the point where it turns into a very unhealthy mind that creates very unhealthy decisions. Part of that is that people don't see a way out anymore, which is another PTSD symptom. So if we're looking at society, and if we can apply this theory, that it is a theory, that the vast majority is traumatized, we can see why everything is going the way it's going and what could be done about it if we would have a proper approach. All right, let's dive into it here, my friends. So let's look at this together. What is trauma? A word that's often used, and I think oftentimes misunderstood in its severity. Trauma is an inner wound. It is a severe event. It can be physical, it can be uh, psychological, it can even be spiritual. It all plays into the same thing, but it is a shock event to the system. It happens when an experience is too overwhelming or painful for the mind and the body to process in the moment. So basically, it gets stored and put into the subconscious nervous system, and then it's stuck there, and it starts affecting everything over time. So trauma never just goes away. There is no case, no example where trauma just went away on its own because it was ignored, because it was not acknowledged, because it was pretended that it's not there. Never has worked. It's basically like saying you embed a computer virus into a computer. Now, as a user, you don't see the virus. You just notice that the more time that passes, the slower the computer gets, the weirder the glitches that it has, and everything starts to malfunction. There is no amount of time that will fix the underlying computer virus. Action has to be taken. You have to go into the core and remove that computer virus in order for the computer to start functioning again. It's exactly the same with trauma, but it is not talked about, it is not acknowledged. And we are now at the breaking point because of something that's called intergenerational or multigenerational trauma. So I'll explain what that means in a minute, but we have to understand trauma is a wound that essentially, if not looked at, never heals. As a matter of fact, it gets bigger with time. In its effects are stronger with time if it is never healed. Okay? No amount of affirmations can heal it. If anyone says, I'm doing positive affirmation, that's wonderful, it doesn't heal the trauma. If trauma is healed and then all the other work happens, that's the way to go, but not the other way around. What happens physiologically over time when trauma remains unresolved? Physiologically means in our body and in our psyche. What begins to happen over time? The body continually stays in survival mode, fight or flight. You don't know this because you become used to it and accustomed to it, but the hormonal output of the body is one of constant stress. Your body's constantly flooded with it. So fatigue, headaches, a feeling of malnutrition because the body uses up so much. What people call ADHD, attention deficit, which is, by the way, it's a culmination of many other stuff, but it's not really a real disease. But those are all symptoms of physiological long-term effects of trauma. The brain is basically rewired for danger. In other words, you live as though you were in a jungle and constantly threatened by animals that might be able to kill you, but you're actually not living in a jungle and you're actually not threatened. But that's what trauma does to the system. It wires it for such a lifestyle. Over time, emotions get blocked because our nervous system, our mind, our brain signals that emotions are dangerous. Emotions might lead us into danger, so emotions are blocked. And the body lives and learns to live with the pain. And if the trauma was severe enough, it even hides that pain from your conscious mind so that you don't constantly relive it, but the body still gets all the signals. So that is what physiologically starts to happen over time. It leads to severe stress, all the stress-related illnesses, cardiovascular, stroke. As a matter of fact, in unresolved trauma cases, over time, the risk for cardiovascular diseases and stroke and so forth goes up 60% and more in people. Unresolved trauma almost always leads to premature death, especially when we're talking multigenerational. It leads to stuff like obesity. It leads to addictions, and we're going to talk about all of that too here. How does trauma affect our behaviors and our relationships? And observe yourself and you'll see it. Hyperreactivity. It's when we bypass sort of a processing path where somebody says something to us and we don't really process the information, we don't really analyze it, we don't go through a rational process any longer, but we have, so from deep under, from deep within, that trauma sends a potential danger signal. That person said something that's critical, that person was maybe even threatening, it might be just an argument, but your body responds hyper because it is always vigilant. It is always on the edge because of that past trauma. So you lash out or you cry or you lose it. That is hyperreactivity. That is a very strong sign that there's unresolved trauma. Trust issues, very, very clear, very natural, which leads to self-sabotage in relationships or other situations, in professions, in the job, in whatever we do. We sabotage ourselves to avoid future pain or disappointment. We um, we do not trust that something good can happen to us because that trauma signal keeps coming up and keeps sending alerts to our brain subconsciously. Danger, danger, this might go wrong, that might go wrong, this might happen again. And boom, and you sabotage all the good things, good relationships, good friendships, and so forth. People pleasing, always making sure situations remain calm. We don't want to upset anyone. We want to make sure that everything is as they expected. Or on the flip side, isolation. If the trauma was severe enough, then people tend to go into isolation mode because that is in their perception the safest way never to get hurt again, right? And I'm telling you that most of these behaviors are completely unconscious. It's not like people choose the behaviors. The behaviors are dictated by the unhealed wound, and they keep coming up and they keep coming up, repeating unhealthy patterns. People that know, they know that eating more and eating all the bad stuff, the junk food and the sweets and drinking, all of that, they know it harms them, but somehow they can't break those patterns. Why? Because they are substituting one behavior for another. They're compensating, and they're using, for example, food or alcohol or drugs or whatever. They're using that as a coping mechanism for the unhealed wounds. It is, without healing, impossible to break these patterns. There's only so much willpower and discipline that anyone can muster up. After a while, if the root cause isn't healed, those patterns and behaviors are going to reappear over time. Numbing addictions, I mean, this is, this is the classic symptom. And what is so interesting is that in the first generation, so when trauma happens to me, all of these are going to be present in my life clearly and strong. But when I am the third or fourth generation of, my father experienced trauma, or my parents and their parents and their parents, I'm the third or fourth generation. Now these things become hardwired. So it's that much more difficult to even realize what is happening on. It's hardwired. It's becoming an epigenetic expression. So that is really important to know. And of course, when we talk about trust issues in relationships and whatnot, we're also talking about troubles with intimacy. And intimacy isn't just physical. It is opening up. It is being honest. It is being vulnerable. It is being fully yourself, which traumatized people usually cannot do because of the fear, because of the constant danger that they feel deep inside. So it affects every aspect of life. Problem is, most people don't know. They think that's just who they are. That's my personality. That's who I am. That's how I've always been. No, it's not true. That is the alteration of your personality because of trauma. And until it stays unhealed, unresolved, unattended, it's only going to get worse. So then we go into, how does trauma affect entire societies? And I want to preface this by saying that what we observe in ourselves, now we have to be sort of brave enough to realize it's happening to everyone. We're at this point, we're all doing it to each other and doing it to ourselves. So if individuals react in unhealthy ways, if a human being makes unhealthy choices in their lives because of trauma, then scale it up. What about that person that is leading a nation? Could they be making unhealthy or trauma related choices because they themselves are just as affected as you are? Do they have a huge shadow that they don't know about, and that's why they do what they do? Could they be inherently bad people? Could they be part of some secret cabal? Sure, but that all is one big story. The trauma story is one big story because all of the pain that we see in the world is caused, the root cause is trauma in humans. Hurt people hurt people. There's no other way. Healthy, whole people do not hurt other people. It just doesn't work that way. Hurt people hurt people. And while that is something that people can wrap their minds around, we tend to go in our solutions not nearly far enough. We think that exchanging one person for another solves the problem. And we see over and over again that that isn't true anymore because everyone is affected to a certain degree. Those who have been on their healing journey for a while or who have done something about it are less affected. They are more aware of it. They're conscious of it. They can observe it in them. They can deal with it differently. But how many people are that? So by now, by 2025, we're living in multi-generational trauma cycles, in feedback loops that keep the story alive and keep intensifying it. And we are at the mainstream mass societal collapse level. This is not sustainable. That's why you see how millions of kids and young teenagers and even adults jumped on a self-mutilation path over the last years with this entire trans issue, and where it became so insane. Why? Because of multi-generational unhealed trauma. This is literally 99% of the time or more, you will find this, that this need to change me, to make me so different than I was, is actually an escape mechanism of trauma. I'll say this again. This has been our field of study for 20 years. This has been Christine's every day for decades. This is what she's been doing. This is her field of expertise. And every single time, people are looking for all kinds of root causes, and then they stop at hormonal imbalance, or they stop at something else that is not the root cause. And she always gets to the root cause. The root cause is always trauma. Whether it was in a different generation, in our own lives, ultimately, it doesn't matter. It is the root cause. So what it does to societies is it normalizes dysfunction. So this is another thing. We have now, a medical body that gets together once a year and basically classifies new mental disorders. There's a plethora, a massive list of quote unquote mental disorders that all have a name. And it's the craziest things. It's like when in 1 year, 500 people will make social media posts about how they are afraid of mops or, I don't know, brooms, then it will be a broom phobia disorder that will be classified that year because so many people suffer from it. What is it? Well, people that are afraid of brooms, whatever. And this is the insanity. When really there's only one dis-ease, 1,000 expressions maybe, but one dis-ease. It is an imbalance. It is a falling out of harmony, a falling out of wholeness and health because of an unhealed wound. That shouldn't be so hard to understand. If you get shot in the leg and you don't do anything about it, and that just continues to bleed, well, you're going to start limping. You're going to start having infections. You're going to start having all kinds of symptoms. But the root cause was the wound. You were shot in the leg. If you don't address that, You can fix around the symptoms as much as you want to. It's not going to fix the root cause. So societies are now largely affected. All the trends you see, thousands and thousands and thousands of young girls, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, going into pornography, going into basically prostitution, glorifying that lifestyle, making it something so normal, right? You see, social media trends where severe harm is caused to oneself or another. You see apathy. You see broken family systems. You see a loss of empathy, where people are so accustomed to pain that it doesn't affect them when they see it, which leads to heightened, it leads to more. You need to up the level to get a reaction, right? So that's why we see ever increasing um, horror and violence in the entertainment industry, in all industries, because there's an apathy level, and because our brains are so apathetic to normal violence. It needs to get worse and worse and worse so that we get stimulated. But what we never ask, and what society doesn't ask, why is it that way? It is a sign of severe multi-generational trauma. So we are in this cycle of abuse and war, of normalization of violence and abuse. Abused people abuse people. There is the odd exception where an abuser wasn't abused themselves. It does seem to occur, but very, very seldom. You always find out that the abuser was once abused themselves. And we are reacting in the same archaic ways, where we only look at punishment, which societies need to protect itself, is valid, and that's all good. So if someone commits violence and abuse, society needs to protect itself, clearly. But then, if that doesn't lead to healing, if that doesn't lead to a greater understanding that healing needs to happen, we are losing the plot, and we are losing the plot on this, right? Completely. So this is where we stand, and the root cause is much simpler than people think. It's just something that's not being talked about much. So what happens after multiple generations don't heal? So the truth is that trauma doesn't just change behavior, it changes biology. So extreme stress, war, abuse, neglect, it alters how the body and the genes function. And these changes are passed to children. You see this when we have experienced this firsthand, because both our families, our grandparents, experienced the Second World War in Europe. And naturally, imagine it's 1946, 47, 48. It's the years after the war. How much trauma healing do you think has happened? How much pain and suffering was witnessed? I remember my grandma would tell me that, she lived out on a farm, and she was forbidden from going down to the river for many years during the war, because the river would often turn red and be full of bodies of dead soldiers and people and whatnot that were thrown in the river. Naturally, she was a curious child, and she didn't obey, and she did go down to the river, and she observed it many times. So now here's a child that over and over sees the river turn red, and dead bodies, mutilated bodies and whatnot in the river. She wasn't even on a battlefield. She didn't, she didn't participate actively in it, but she was a witness to it, like millions and millions and millions of others. So you had entire nations that were systemically traumatized through wars and the effects of war. Those nations and the people in those nations were so concerned with rebuilding the nations and the economies, and getting the families going. Not many men were left, and so you had to somehow keep the families going, and procreation, all the things. And so trauma was passed down completely unresolved, and started to manifest in the genetic expression. And so we can now observe, and this is very specific to Europe, we can observe certain behavioral patterns in almost every family that are extremely unhealthy, but they exist. We can trace them back to the trauma of war that was unresolved. So this is how the biology starts to change. And if you want to understand this in the sense of sexual abuse, incest, systemic, please go and listen to Kathy O'Brien, who has been talking about this for 30 years, MK Ultra survivor, who has very deep background knowledge on the systemic abuse cycles that are introduced into families and societies and that are fostered to become multi-generational. So then, after 3 generations, for example, of incest behavior, the incest becomes hardwired and is, I don't know how much more likely to happen in the next generation. So it then becomes a preference, if you will. It becomes something that's hardwired into the biology and has to be healed in order to be broken, that pattern. But how many people know this? This is hidden, it's not talked about, this, all of these, this is taboo. But this is what actually really happens. So here we see, the sort of one way to explain the generational trauma. When you look at it, so you have, let's say that's the grandfather, experienced war, experienced oppression, experienced abuse or natural disasters, naturally wasn't healed, especially back then. Think about 60, 70 years ago. Those things were not talked about. So then his son will already grow up in an environment, biological and social, that is fight or flight, that is always weary. It's always danger because dad exhibits all these. Dad has that energy. Dad gave me that energy. I don't know that, but I feel it. I feel it in my hormones. I feel it in my experience, but I don't know where it came from. I'm just living it. And now I have a son, and now that son is really screaming at the top of his lungs with his behavior. He's becoming maybe criminal activities, addictive activities, mental illness. That is a cry for help from that generation, saying there is so much baggage here, so many burdens. I can't deal with it. I can't carry them any longer. That's why we see a generation today that is self-mutilating, that is calling it self-expression, but they're putting metals in all parts of their bodies, and they're cutting themselves, and they're harming themselves in many, many different ways. It is a severe cry for help. And in my estimation, it is the last generation if we don't heal, because these kids are already shying away from having children. They're already seeing procreation as basically a punishment. They see themselves, oftentimes I hear them, imagine a child saying, 18, 19 years old, I wish I was aborted. You know what that means? That's a kind of self-hatred and pain we can't even imagine. And that is the last generation, if for not entirely, of course, but in many nations, it's a trend. If we don't do anything about it, this is where we stand. Multi-generational trauma only goes so far. It leads to mass extinction because on top of everything else that is happening, it shuts down the natural desire to procreate. It shuts down the natural desire to be healthy. It shuts down the natural desire to have community and to have healthy, beautiful relationships. All of those desires die after certain multi-generational trauma cycles have been created. Each generation adds more stress until it gets to the breaking point. Previous generations, the first trauma generation or the second trauma generation, severe trauma, I should say, they will often say, I don't understand why my child has such problems. The world's a rough place, but we just push through. And you just push through that. Bad things happen to everyone and you move on. What they don't understand is that the added stress that comes with each generation means added baggage, added burdens, added weight. So while I was able to push through, maybe my children might not be able any longer if there was no healing. It's just too much. It gets to the breaking point. The symptoms start younger. Addiction start at very, very young ages now, right? They start in the toddler age. And it's being fostered with the kind of access to technology, for example. You see toddlers now at 2 years old being completely addicted to iPads or phones because of the dopamine level hits and whatnot, but we don't see that there is a predisposition for that addiction because of passed on trauma. That's what we don't see. That's what we don't acknowledge. We think it's enough to take away the screens, that is just one thing. We have to actually start healing. Healing is what breaks the cycle. It's when one person says, it didn't start with me, but it stops with me. This has been the theme for many people, where they realized this shit didn't begin with me. I didn't cause it. I was already a victim of it, and then I contributed to it. But now that I know, it stops with me. And if I, it sounds sort of fantastical if I tell you that all of the world's biggest problems are caused by trauma. And here's where this plays into everything that we know. You might say, but there are non-human entities that steer this world, that have no empathy, and they're going to continue to do what they do even if we heal from trauma. Here's the thing. Nothing can happen ultimately without our participation. So where we don't participate, it doesn't happen. Whole, healthy people do not participate in self-destructive or generally destructive behaviors. They don't. They don't fear consequences because they're whole and healthy. So they don't participate. They don't play along. They don't go to war. They don't do it. They're not willing to do something that would harm themselves or another. But unhealed people do it out of fear, do it out of sort of the hormonal imbalance that they're experiencing because of trauma. They do it because it's hardwired into their system, and because that's what was passed on to them. The number one solution to the greatest suffering in the world today is healing. It's, and a government can't provide that. Nothing but actual healing can provide that. And governments will continue to fall short, and we will continue to fall short if we believe that government can do it. They can't. They simply can't. What they lack is the awareness of the actual problem. When for the first time in history, a leader will step up and say, we're looking at extreme tensions in the world. We're looking at century-old conflicts that are escalating. We are looking at the biosphere collapse. We are looking at extreme technological control systems that want to take over. We're looking at all of these problems. And the solution is not fighting each problem on the same level where it was created. The solution is actually that we are dealing with so much pain in our souls, in our spirits, in our psyches, in our hearts, in our bodies, that we can't function any longer. We are not creative enough to have good solutions. We need to first heal. Now, that would take so much courage. And I don't see currently a leader that would have that kind of courage to say it, but we do need to heal. And we can blame them all they want for all their actions, but their actions say the same thing that I'm saying here. They're also traumatized people. Once again, hurt people hurt people. And unfortunately, our society doesn't have the wisdom or understanding to promote and support leaders that are actually whole and healthy. How would we know as a people if we're not whole and healthy? You see what I'm saying is it's a feedback loop. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. So how can we heal? And the first thing to know here is, yes, you can heal. I want to give you maybe an inspiring image. Here's what I realized. The distance of suffering, the length of suffering that we experience as people is from the time that we were hurt to the time that we make a choice to do something about it. So that is our distance of suffering. For some people, that's days, very seldom. For most people, it's years or decades. So let's say you were hurt as a child. Let's say experienced something really bad. You were 8, 7, 5, 10, I don't know. Now you're 63. So that's 50 years. That's your distance of suffering until you make a choice to do something about it. When you make the choice that you do something about it, the healing already begins. By making the choice, the healing starts. It's the first step to healing and basically the end of that suffering journey, or the beginning of the end. Okay. So if you are aware, then you can shorten that distance today. What happens after you make a choice? After you make a choice, you commit to it. You say, okay, how can I do that? How can I heal? How can I find out what happened to me? Why I'm experiencing the same patterns in life? Why do I keep falling in love with the same person with different names, right? How many people, how many people have experienced the same relationship with different people, and I go, I always fall for the abusive ones. I always fall for the flaky ones. I always fall for the unreliable ones, whatever, until we realize it is saying, it is showing us something. So we have to first face our story. And the first thing that I can say with some confidence is, if you're watching this, it is more than likely that you can say, I was hurt, because it applies to virtually every person that I've ever met. They were hurt severely. Maybe they witnessed something they shouldn't have. Maybe something was done to them that shouldn't have happened. Maybe they were part of a very, very abusive environment where there was constant danger, emotional. It doesn't always have to be physical. If you're exposed to a lot of fighting and drama and screaming and shouting while you're a child, you're going to be wounded. Maybe they were abused. Maybe they witnessed war. Maybe they were in a war zone. Maybe there was a natural disaster, a fire. I'm telling you, there is no person that I've met that hasn't experienced pain, and actually severe pain in some form. So we need to face that as a truth, okay, and say, okay, let me look at it. Let me face it. We need to realize that there are certain things that we can do immediately to start calming our nervous system down. Breath work, meditation, and prayer are surefire ways to calm your system down. They are not necessarily the healing itself. They're part of it, but they're not necessarily the healing itself. Um, we need to find safe connections and ask for help properly, right? Trauma healing it used to be embedded into our rituals, spiritual rituals, and societal rituals. Our ancestors at some point knew it, and it was done basically right after the fact. So you had, if you look at the indigenous people of America, the Indians, um, sweat lodge, the sweat ceremony was, for example, a trauma healing ceremony, and it was it happened usually days after the initial pain event. So there was very, very little time that passed. But that was acknowledged. It was acknowledged that wounds can stay in our spirit, in our psyche, and that they require a ritual to be healed. Today, through spiritual and psychological education and movements, and most of these practices were actually modified and borrowed from indigenous communities. So almost all trauma healing methodologies go back to indigenous knowledge. And so you have, for example, one method that we keep talking about, and I'll say this right away, there are others. We simply only promote and talk about the ones that we have used and we know, and that we use ourselves. So there's one called The Journey. I've talked about it many times, and we're not affiliated. Founded by and created by Brandon Bass. She wrote a great book. You can look it up on the website. I'll recommend reading it. And this is a process where you can, on her website, you can find a practitioner, or you can go to our website and click on trauma healing. I put the link there, and you can connect with our middle daughter, who is a journey practitioner. But there are practitioners from all over the world, and you pick one that you want to connect with, and then you schedule a session. And these are usually not ongoing therapy sessions. This is a process that is done a one-off, and then maybe a second or a third over time. but it is a trauma healing process for both physical and psychological slash spiritual trauma. Extremely potent, goes to the root, and we've done it many, many times. I've facilitated it myself quite a few times, and it's a very, very powerful process. I would recommend that everyone does at least one, but I would actually recommend more. Specifically in our locals community, inspired.locals.com, we have a lot of people that have done it and share their experiences and how life has changed since. Then there is the inherited trauma healing, meaning things that we might not necessarily know about, but we feel it comes from our family, our ancestors, our grandparents, our parents, whatever. And then there is a method that is called inherited trauma healing or family constellation therapy. And this is also, once again, completely observed from indigenous communities and then brought into the modern psychological context for societies, modern societies, to understand it. Uh, a method that was developed to a large degree by Bert Hellinger, the late Bert Hellinger, um, who practiced it into his 90s. He passed away a few years ago. And there is one practitioner in the United States that has been recommended to us many, many times, Mark Wolin. Encourage you to check it out and think about. My ideal scenario would be that everyone does at least one of both, one of a journey session and one of a family constellation session. That would already have such a huge impact on you and your family system. It also, and not only involves family systems, it involves any system where people are together, live together, work together. But what we also need to do is create more and more awareness around this. The world is looking for the solution to the greatest problems that we're facing. And the truth is that the one common issue that all these problems have, and the one that connects everyone, it all includes people. The world is full of people problems. It's not full of tree problems. It's not full of ocean problems. It's not full of monkey problems. It's full of people problems. And I do know that we are talking about a construct. I do know that we're talking about non-human influences, but we have to see one thing, that nothing can happen to us unless we're so unhealed that we subconsciously allow it. We are cooperative components in our own destruction. We're cooperative components in abuse of each other. And we don't, for the most part, do it consciously. We do it because we're not hardwired, and that is not an excuse. It's not an excuse for anyone or absolution. I'm the first person to tell you what I would do with someone that abuses a child. You know what's going to happen. You know what I would do. But I also know that unless we address the underlying issue and go into healing, nothing will fundamentally change, and we will be very soon, or are, at the breaking point. As much as critical mass is breaking through, the mass at large is breaking apart, and healing is the answer. All right, my friends, I want to invite you we're going to do a short Q&A session here. If you want to ask questions, please do so in the live chat in all caps. That makes it easier. And you can ask anything. It doesn't have to be related to the subject. But yeah, we're opening this up for a little bit of Q&A here. Grierson, or Charlotte, our dear friend. Jean, do you think there is a feeling of being a loser if we admit to being traumatized, or a feeling of shame?
Oh, a lot of people have that.
That's a brilliant question. And Charlotte, let me answer it. Everyone has that. Everyone feels it. Everyone feels shame. Everyone feels shame for something that was done to them. Isn't that? And this is a part of the program too, right? How do you keep trauma cycles alive? You program people into staying silent about it. You program shame into people. You make them somehow feel like they are somehow guilty. And this is the biggest block or hurdle for people to get over, to actually do something. we are thankfully have created an environment in healing that doesn't stigmatize any longer. But I will say this: I would not go out and proclaim what you're going to do and how you're going to do trauma healing and what has happened to you. If you feel inspired to talk about it once you have done those steps and once you have gone through a significant healing journey in order to inspire others, yes. But before that, choose the people that you want to talk to. Also, there is sort of a we have this need, I don't know why, but suffering tends to want to have suffering in its company. There is no value in three people getting together and sharing their suffering stories, and none of them is healed. None of them has any solutions. Uh, it's a myth. You want to speak with people that you feel have already done some of that journey, that can observe it, that are empathetic, but they're not in the same emotional and energetic space. And so that's why I say, when you reach out to really good professionals with really good backgrounds, that is a safe space to open yourself up. I know these are just words, but you have absolutely no reason to be ashamed whatsoever. And I also want to say that specifically when children are traumatized and they're systemically traumatized and they are part of systemic abuse, what happens is that these children will often be prompted or instructed or programmed to also hurt others. And those memories can be very painful because we feel guilty or ashamed. But I will once again quote our dear friend Kathy O'Brien. She said, "You can't be responsible for something that you were programmed to do, and basically MK Ultra, if you will, to do." So find that trusted practitioner, trusted person, and begin a conversation. But a brilliant, brilliant question. Thank you, Charlotte. Inspired, how do we escape the trap of reincarnation and escape the matrix to become one with divine infinite awareness? The reason why Christine and I talk about healing is because it can't happen without healing. If you, and I'll put this as a theory. If you believe in the reincarnation trap theory, but trap really only means that we allow ourselves to be deceived. You can't be forced. Nothing can be forced. But a traumatized being, a being that has lived a life full of suffering and pain, will be very, very easy to deceive over someone who's whole and in touch with their intuition and is living their best possible life. So, this is why the things that we talk about, in my perception, matter, because they're actually solutions for all these questions. So, my answer is, if you live a life that is committed to truth on all levels, and embodying truth, which also means healing, embodying truth, which also means realizing that all limiting beliefs are programs, embodying truth, which also means that you are a divine expression, that you are spirit. When you live that while you are in this body, then once you transition, it is my theory that you will be just as aware of deceptions and seductions as you are in this world, and that you will be sharpened, and your ability to discern will be clear, and that you can make a sovereign choice to do whatever you want to do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
I'm sorry. She kind of asked the same question twice, so I'm going with this one, okay?
Okay. After years of trying different modalities and healing methods, including the journey, how come there are still a lot of drama happening, never ending? Do you have experience of this? Yes. So healing is a journey. Brandon Bays, who is the founder of the Journey Method, does sessions every week. They're sort of maintenance sessions, if you will. And they're probably not always the long, deep processes, but she does it. Why? She appreciates and understands that we still live in a feedback loop society. So that trauma cycle is here. which means that constant new uh, signals are being sent to you consciously or subconsciously. You're witnessing violence, you're hearing about violence, you're hearing about atrocities, you're learning about stuff that's being done to humanity. And that in and of itself are micro traumas. Like, it's not normal. We're just desensitized to it. But this is not normal life. This is not what life is. This is a complete insane, society today. And so you will be on the journey. It will get easier with time, and healing will become a more natural, more easy to accept thing. Also, with time, you become more prolific in knowing where to look and when to look at it and when not to look. But really, the gist of the answer here is that challenges do not disappear from your life because you are on a healing journey. You just are much better equipped to deal with them. You have a completely different outlook. But if severe drama shows up in your experience still, and if that hasn't gotten any better, I would encourage you to keep going with the healing. And this can be frustrating. And I'll say this too, that, oftentimes what Charlotte said earlier, we feel the shame or the guilt or the frustration because you say, well, I've done all these things. I've gone to this retreat and I've done the ayahuasca, I've done the journey, I've done all this, but I still feel it's almost like a master class. And I wish I could have a better answer for you, but it's a journey that needs to be taken. And I felt and feel at times the same frustration because there's still stuff that comes up or comes up again. And I thought it was all dealt with, and it comes up and it needs to be dealt with again, needs to be looked at again. And it seems like that can't be life, but put it in perspective. Look at how the world functions. Look at what we have been doing to each other for so long. It's been going on for many, many generations. So to assume it could be done in a couple sessions is sort of kind of unrealistic considering how much we've been through. So if it is any comfort to know that it is a very similar experience for many of us or most of us, but it does get better when we honestly address the stuff that comes up. It gets much better. Do you have
the last question, I think.
Do you have any good methods of transform the hatred I feel towards the evil of this world into something positive and directed? Well, here's the thing. There's a train station, and you are waiting at that train station, and the train that you're waiting for has a big font on it on the side of the train, and it says unconditional love. That's the train that you've been waiting for. And that train rolls into the train station, and the guy comes out and he whistles and he says, all on board, the train is leaving. And you're standing there and you feel a strong urge to get on that train, and you step on the board like you have one foot up there and one foot is still in the train station, and the train starts to slowly roll and you start to walk besides the train, and you jump on that platform, and then you jump off again and jump on again and jump off again. And then at the last minute you jump off and you don't make it on the train. You haven't made a full choice to step into love yet, to get on that unconditional love train. I understand it. I totally understand it. We feel like if we would let go of our contempt, of our despise, of our hatred of this evil, of the abusers, of if we would let go, we would let them win. Because if we can't have any violent energy against them any longer, then they win. Then they have received what they wanted. And there are days where I still think that, also being a guy, it's kind of like, and then I realized that the one thing The one thing that they don't want us to get to, that they keep us from experiencing and living and being, is that unconditional love. That's what they try to prevent with all their might. Well, if that's the one thing that they're trying to prevent us from living, that must be the antidote. And so, love, ultimately, the real love, not the conditional love, not the I like you because you're pretty love, but the real spirit, universal, all encompassing, all engulfing love must be the antidote, must be the all healing tool. And so at some point, you got to make the decision to jump on that train. Step in, walk around, watch what happens. And be willing to get transformed in the process. Letting go of hatred, even righteous hatred, if there is such a thing, it's not that it's not justified, but allowing it to be transformed into love, it can be a very challenging process. And we all have that challenge. All of us, trust me. You're not alone. We all feel it. But love must be the one thing, because we're not allowed to live it fully. That's what we're never allowed to do. Yep. All right, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are 10 days away from the After Awakening Retreat. If you feel like checking it out, afterawakeningretreat.com. It's a 2-day online event. That means that it's not happening physically anywhere. It's happening in the cyberspace. And it's going to be on a platform called StreamYard. You don't need to download a software or have any special equipment. You just click on a link and you'll be in it. And it's going to be quite a wonderful journey. I so look forward to it. So if you want to learn more about the After Awakening Retreat, click on the link in the video description. There's a few more days for sign up. And we want to thank you all. We want to thank you for being here, for going on this journey with us. If you found value in this show today, please screenshot it, bookmark it, share it with your friends and family. I would love for people to talk about this more, understand the information here, and then actually go and take a step. I've never met anyone who has come back and said, man, I started my healing journey and I wish I hadn't. Never met anyone. All right. Much love, many blessings. We'll be back with you again very, very soon. Your environment shapes everything, your thoughts, your health, your energy. But most people never question the invisible field they live in. We did, and that's when FLFE found us. It's not a product, it's a field of pure life force energy that lifts everything it touches. We now live in it 24/7, and we would love to invite you to experience it too. Start your free 15-day trial now. No pressure, no strings attached. Just the truth, resonance, and peace.